Hi. Okay, so I've been thinking about people lately, like specific people, the ones that you can attach an entire period of your life to. Like you hear a song and suddenly you're 17 again. You smell something and you're back in your grandmother's house. You see a certain street and you're remembering someone that you haven't spoken to in 5 years. Or someone calls you and for a second, you're not the person that you are now, you're that version of yourself. And I think that's such a strange thing, you know, that we don't just remember people, like we remember ourselves through people. So much of our own mythology is made up of other human beings. The person who knew you before you even knew yourself, the person who taught you something, the person who hurt you, the person who loved you when you didn't know how to receive it, the friend who existed for one very specific chapter of your life, the person you thought you'd know forever, that person who changed something in you and probably has absolutely no idea that they did. And then there's people who become so attached to a particular version of you that when you think about them, you're not even sure whether you miss them or you miss who you were when they were around. Which is honestly a little fucked up because what do you even do with that? Like, what do you honestly do with that? What do you do when someone mattered enormously to you, but your relationship with them wasn't simple? When you love someone and they still hurt you? When you're angry with someone and you still understand them? When someone you know did their best, but their best still wasn't enough for you? We're constantly being encouraged to make these decisions about people, like good person, bad person, keep them, cut them off, forgive them, forget them, move on, get closure. And sometimes those things are necessary. But I think we're often trying to make complicated people fit into simple stories because simple stories are easier to carry. So maybe this field note is about what happens when we stop trying to make them simple. Sometimes I think about people like timestamps, not necessarily because they were the most important person that you'll meet at that time, but just they happened to meet you in a very particular moment in your life. They met you while you were becoming someone, and they were there when you first started questioning everything you'd been taught, when you were falling apart, when your life was just life. Maybe they were there for the summer. And somehow, years later, you can still point to that person and say, that was who I was back then, you know? It's such a strange responsibility to give another human being without either of you agreeing to it. You know? It's like they weren't just living their life. They were also unknowingly becoming part of yours. And I think that's why certain people can be so difficult to let go of. Because letting go of them can feel less like losing a person and more like admitting that a version of your life is over. And maybe that's why we keep certain people alive in our minds, you know? Not because we're incapable of moving forward, but some part of us doesn't want to erase who we were when they were there. And when I talk about mythology, I'm not just talking about like romantic relationships. Some of our first relationships are the ones we never choose, like your parents, our siblings, our families. Those relationships can become some of the most complicated ones that we ever have because they're tied to the beginning of our understanding of ourselves. Before you knew what love was, someone was already teaching you what love looked like. Before you knew what safety was, someone was already teaching you what safety felt like. Before you could even articulate what you needed, you were already learning whether your needs would be noticed. And I don't think I mean that in like a dramatic, your childhood determines your entire life kind of way. I think people are more complicated than that because we carry so many things, you know, expectations and fears and little rules that we learned without realizing we were learning them. Like, don't ask for too much, don't make things difficult, be useful, don't need anyone. Be good. And but then you grow up and you catch yourself thinking, oh, damn, 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 damn. I learned that somewhere. That's when you start looking back at the people who raised you and realize that they are people too. Not just your mom, not just your dad, a person, you know, someone who was also once 22 and confused, someone who had their own wounds, probably still have them, someone who had their own parents, someone who made mistakes, someone who loved you or hurt you all at once. And maybe that's where things get difficult because understanding someone doesn't erase what they did. Recognizing their humanity doesn't require you to deny your own. You can understand why someone behaved the way that they did and still say, you hurt me. You can know that they did their best and still admit that their best wasn't everything that you needed. There's something uncomfortable, but I think also freeing about being able to hold both. Because one of the hardest things about relationships is that love doesn't always disappear when the relationship becomes painful. You can love someone and be angry with them. You can miss someone and know you shouldn't return to them. You can remember something beautiful and something awful about the same person within the same minute. And we're not very good at holding these contradicting factors in our heads, you know? We want our feelings to behave like evidence. We want them to fit in these boxes, you know? Like if I love them, they must be good for me, you know? If they hurt me, I must not love them anymore. And if I miss them, then maybe I made a mistake leaving. And if I'm angry, then maybe everything good that they did was fake. But feelings don't work like that. They're not particularly interested in making our lives convenient, you know? You can love someone who isn't good for you. You can be hurt by someone who genuinely loves you. You can have a beautiful relationship that still needs to end. You can have a complicated relationship with someone and still love them. You can forgive someone without wanting them anywhere near you. And maybe the problem isn't that our feelings are contradicting, you know? It's maybe that we're just expecting them to be singular when they are actually layered. And that becomes even more complicated, you know, once time gets involved also. Because eventually, we're not only remembering what happened, we're remembering the story that we made of it in our heads, you know? And that's where the mythology comes in because after enough time passes, we don't always remember people exactly as they were. We remember the story that we created or that they left. And the thing about stories is that they are dangerous because they need characters. You know, there's the villain, there's the person who saved you, the one who got away, the person who ruined everything, the person you were stupid to love, the person who taught you what love was. Those stories can help us survive. You might need to make someone a villain because admitting that you loved them makes the hurt harder to understand because how could you? You might need to romanticize someone because admitting the relationship was ordinary makes the loss feel unbearable. You might need to believe that they were absolutely perfect or they were absolutely terrible because they were a complicated person who mattered to you, who loved you in ways and hurt you in other ways. And neither of those things cancels the other ones out. That is a much harder story to carry. And maybe it's closer to the truth because people are really characters. They're people, which means that they can be selfish and generous and beautiful and disappointing and cruel and tender and wise and incredibly fucking stupid all at the same time. And so can we, you know? Maybe that's why the stories we tell about other people are so often also stories about ourselves. Yeah. But I also don't think that we always miss people, you know? Like I said, I think we miss who we were around them. Like these versions of ourselves that only seem to exist in certain relationships. You know, the version of you that's ridiculously funny with one person, the version that's quiet with another, the version that feels intelligent around someone who genuinely wants to hear what you're thinking, the version that feels like a child around an authority figure or a parent, the version that becomes incredibly romantic around someone they love. And that's part of why relationships can feel so disorienting when they end, because you're not just losing access to another person, you're losing access to a particular relational version of yourself. So when you think, oh, I miss them, maybe part of what you're actually really trying to say is, I miss the person I was when I was loved like that. Or I miss the person I became because of them. And that's such a strange kind of grief because you can't necessarily go back. That version of you existed under those very specific circumstances. But maybe we don't have to get the old version back, you know? Maybe we can carry them forward. Maybe that's what remembering is for. So, what do we actually do with the people who become part of our mythology? Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. And I think that's probably the most honest answer I can give you. Sometimes the answer is distance, yes. Sometimes it's reconciliation. Sometimes it's friendship. Sometimes it's accepting that you'll never get the apology that you wanted. Sometimes it's rebuilding something. It's leaving something alone. It's just remembering, you know? I don't think every relationship needs a clean ending. Some end very messy. Some end quietly. Some end and somehow begin again in a completely different form. And some people remain in your life for the longest time. And others become memories. And a few become stories that you tell about yourself to other people. But I think the important part is not letting the story become more important than the truth. If someone hurt you, you don't have to romanticize that because they also love you. If someone loved you, you don't have to erase that because the relationship ended. If your parent failed you in some way, understanding their circumstances doesn't require you to pretend that you were not affected by the situation. If someone was important to you once, you don't have to hate them to prove that you moved on. Maybe reconciliation isn't always about reconciling with the person. Maybe sometimes it's about reconciling the different versions of the stories that you created inside yourself. The person you loved, the person who hurt you, the person that you hurt, the person that you were, the person that you are now. What actually happened? Maybe what you wish had happened. Finding a way to let them all exist without one needing to destroy the other one. And maybe this is the part that makes no sense. But because we spend so much of our lives trying to understand what people mean to us, we meet someone, we love them, we fight them, we learn, we hurt each other, we miss each other, we forgive, we don't forgive. We talk about them in therapy, we write poems about them, we make playlists about them, for them. We block them, we unblock them, we look at their Instagram and pretend that we don't look at their Instagram. We build entire philosophies around people who probably just went home that night and ate cereal and never thought about that moment ever again. It's ridiculous, you know? But maybe it's also kind of beautiful. And it's obviously exhausting. But somehow it's what we do, what we always do. We attach meaning to each other. We make little worlds. We leave pieces of ourselves with one another, in one another. Then we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out what to do with all these pieces. Maybe that's the part of being human, is that we're all walking around carrying tiny museums full of people. Some rooms are beautiful, some rooms are painful and look horrendous. Some probably haven't been open in years. And some we still don't know what to do with. I don't think there is a lesson here. At least I don't want there to be. I don't know what you're supposed to do with the people in your life who become part of your mythology. Honestly, maybe we need to let someone go. Maybe we need to call someone. Maybe we need to forgive someone. Maybe we need to stop forgiving someone, actually. And we need to accept that someone mattered to you, and that's the only explanation that you need. And maybe you need to grieve a relationship that technically hasn't even ended. Maybe you need to stop turning someone into either a villain or soulmate and let them be what they actually were or are, a complicated human being who is existing or existed in your life. I don't know. But there is something comforting, I think, about realizing that we don't have to erase people in order to move forward. We can just remember. We can change the meaning. We can grow around the memory. We can let ourselves say, "You mattered. You hurt me. I loved you. I was angry with you. I completely misunderstood you. I'm glad that you existed." All of those things can be true. Maybe that's what growing up actually is, you know? Not figuring out which feeling is the correct one, but learning that you have to make room for all of them. Because the people that we meet don't always stay, but sometimes they become part of the language that we use to understand who we are. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's enough. Yeah, dude. I don't know. Those are just some of my unfinished thoughts. I will see you in the next one.